SRA has run over 50 online events, and they've been great, but there really is no substitute for actually getting people in the room, being able to have conversations with people face to face, and also to remind ourselves that we all have legs. Now, one thing I haven't missed about physical events is reminding people where the toilets are or what to do if there's a fire drill, so I'll have to do that now, which is toilets over there if you need it, and we're not expecting a fire alarm, but if it goes off, the fire exit's out the back, there'll be people to guide you down the stairs, and we'll meet out the front. It's an absolute pleasure to be here in Liverpool. I travelled up from Birmingham this morning. Liverpool is one of my favourite cities, but it's a really appropriate venue as well for an event about innovation and how we can help the public better access legal services. And that's because Liverpool has a really proud record of pioneering innovation, inventions that help the public. So whether that's the world's first lending library, the world's first integrated sewer system, the world's first, very topically, School of Tropical Disease and Medicine, has a really proud record of those things. And I know maybe books, sewage and disease doesn't float your boat. I've had some terrible nights out that feel a bit like that. But also, if that doesn't float your boat, Liverpool also invented the hovercraft. And I think we can all agree no evening out would be worse for going on a hovercraft. But Liverpool is also close to my heart because it's also the city in which I had probably the strangest encounter with technology that I've ever had. And it was about a decade ago. I was going to a music festival in Liverpool, which I travelled up for, and I arrived a bit early. So it was actually the day of the Merseyside Derby, so I ended up going into a pub. It was the Grapes, if anyone knows that pub, and I went in there, and it was lively in there, but I got chatting to one of the few Evertonians in there, really nice chap, chatted about football, chatted about work. Everton scored a last-minute equaliser, so he was absolutely delighted, and really nice chap, bought me a drink, and we wished each other well, and I went on my way. Apart from I didn't, because he said something to me at the end which really jolted me. And he said to me, "Well, it was lovely meeting you, Benedict. Have a great time in Liverpool." I hadn't told him my name was Benedict. In fact, I only ever introduce myself as Benedict if I'm trying to be posh or Catholic, or if my mum is telling me off. So I knew that I hadn't introduced myself as Benedict. I generally introduce myself as Ben. So I was like, well, how does this guy know my name? Is he a spy? Should I be getting in touch with the ICO? And I'm going to leave you to dwell on that and see if you can work out how he knew my name. It's a little bit of a cliffhanger there, and I'll come back to that answer later on. But perhaps if I move on now to say, why are we at the SRA in Liverpool, and why are we doing an event on innovation? Most of you hopefully know the SRA, and hopefully think of us as we're about rules, we're about making sure solicitors work to high professional standards, making sure those who qualify cut the mustard, and also stepping in when things go wrong. But we're also interested in innovation because we have a duty around access to justice, and we have to try and work to make sure we're improving access to justice. And again, everyone in this room will know that there's a real problem with access to justice in this country. Lots of people, when they have a legal problem, lots of them do nothing. But even those who do try and get help, many struggle to access a solicitor or an expert legal advisor to get the help they can get. And obviously that really matters. It can be the difference between losing your home or your family or your job or even your liberty. And even if you're a small business, it could be the difference between success and failure. So we want to try and increase access to justice, but that's not a simple thing, and it's a complex problem. But we need to look at what we can do as a regulator to help that. And one thing we think we can do as a regulator is look at how we can encourage innovation. And that is actually been put at the heart of our work, because if you look at our corporate strategy, and I don't imagine many of you do, but we have 3 priorities for this 3-year period that we're in. And one of those is what we can do to promote innovation and support technology that could help the public. So what does that look like in practice? Well, perhaps if I run through just 3 things we've been doing at the SRA to try and support innovation. So the first one is, hopefully you know that we reformed our, what was the handbook, our rule book, which was 600 odd pages long. It was quite lengthy, it was quite prescriptive, it was quite complex, and we felt that actually there was quite a bit of bureaucracy that could be stripped out of that, and we thought it was far more appropriate to give solicitors, the professionals, put more trust in their judgment, to give them more flexibility, and to focus on really what matters in there. So we managed to reduce it down to not much longer than 100 pages long, and give firms more flexibility. Has that been a success? Well, I think it's probably too early to sort of declare victory on that, but we are going to be publishing a review, sort of first year or so review of that just before the end of this year. But I think a couple of things just to note about that is, firstly, COVID and the COVID pandemic. I think those changes have stood up pretty well during the pandemic, because obviously that was a huge event, massive uncertainty. What do you want your rules to do in that situation? You want it to give people flexibility. And so instead of a situation where we might have been a few years ago, where there would have been lots of guidance that had to go out, lots of waivers, lots of trying to tell people whether they needed to comply with that sort of niggly rule over there, actually there was enough flexibility there that firms and solicitors could make judgments around how to be flexible and how to react best in obviously unprecedented circumstances. I think the second thing just to point out is one of the flexibilities that came in there was to enable solicitors to work as freelance solicitors in a different way, perhaps that suits their needs, but also the needs of their clients. And we've had about 370 solicitors take on that option to work flexibly. So there seems to be a demand there for that. So on to the second thing we've done in terms of promoting innovation, and that is we have a program within the SRA and a team that is there to promote innovation. And it's probably a good point at which to point out Warren and Ben. You don't have to be called Ben to work at the SRA, but obviously it helps. And they work in that team. So if you've got any questions about sort of innovation and how we can support you to innovate, they're the right people to speak to. And that team is very much there to, if you've got an idea, if you're a law firm or a business who's got an idea but you don't know how to get it off the ground, or you don't know what the regulatory implications are, come to us, speak to us, and we'll try and help you. And what different ways we can do that is we can sort of test certain ideas. Sometimes there's regulatory implications that spread across regulators, so we can try and team up regulators to work through those. So that's the second thing. And then the third and final thing I just wanted to point out we do get involved in quite a lot of government-funded projects around innovation. And one government-funded project that we ran was the Legal Access Challenge, where we put some prize money out there to fund sort of legal tech solutions that might help normal consumers. And that finished last year. We had more than 300 people involved, more than 100 applications for that. Some really interesting ideas, things like chatbots, working with MenCap to help people with learning disabilities understand what they can access in terms of social care and what their benefits might be. But it wasn't about just interesting ideas. It was also about understanding what we could do to make innovation easier. And one of the things that did come out of that project, and I just sort of mentioned it, was people were saying, well, the SRA rules don't sort of block innovation, but actually it gets quite confusing between financial services regulation, legal regulation, data governance regulation. How do making all those work makes it quite a high barrier to try and get some things off the ground. And so again, that's something we're looking at, how we can improve that join up between regulators to make it easier for people. So I've mentioned COVID a couple of times, but I'm just going to ask a couple of questions to you guys linked to COVID. And the first question I wanted to ask was, could you raise your hand if you've made a change to your business on the back of COVID that you think is going to last, hopefully, in a post-COVID world? So put your hand up if you think you've made a business change and that's going to stick. Okay, so most people are putting their hand up, not everyone. The second question I was going to ask was, how many people are using video conferencing now to meet clients or talk to clients? Pretty much most people, and there may be some people going, well, I've always used it, but some may have started using it. We did some research over the summer with Oxford University, spoke to almost 1,000 firms, and that was looking at innovation and technology in the legal sector. 90% of firms told us that changes they've made during the pandemic they think will last. A similar proportion were saying they're using video conferencing to meet clients. COVID has shifted the dial almost through necessity, but then also that research also told us that there are still barriers, and two of the biggest barriers, particularly around technology and innovation, was one, money, affordability, people not having enough money to invest in that, and two, people saying they didn't have the in-house sort of tech expertise to really understand what they're choosing and how to go ahead. If you want to read that research, it's on our website. We've also done some webinars on our YouTube channel. It's a really interesting piece of work if you want to have a look at that. So I'm going to just finish off shortly now by just highlighting a couple of things that the SRA is going to be doing in this space to look out for in the future. The first one of those is we've just got some funding to run a pilot down in the southwestern Wales, and that is working with universities, councils and charities down there to again look at can we develop some legal technology to help consumers in that region, and what can we learn from that? And then the second thing, which you may have seen in the legal press yesterday, we announced that we're going to be running an unbundling pilot. An unbundling, for those who maybe aren't familiar with it, is where you unbundle services. You get the client to do some stuff, particularly perhaps the more simple stuff like filling in forms, and then what you focus on and what the client pays for is then the sort of expert solicitors work where you can. The reason we're doing a pilot on that is there is the potential for unbundling of services to reduce costs, but there are potential sort of issues or problems or queries about it, such as, for instance, well, how do I make sure I'm working in my client's best interest? You know, what if something goes wrong? How do I speak to my insurers about this? So that's one of the reasons we want to run that pilot, to understand what are the upsides of that, but also what are the challenges and can you do anything about that? So if that sounds interesting to you, or you think, oh, well, actually, I'm already doing some sort of unbundling, get in touch with us, because we want firms to be involved in that pilot. So that's it from me in terms of the SRA, and we've got 8 speakers today who are probably going to provide far more interesting insights than me. And I think what we want to do with today is, I suppose, 3 things. Firstly, there will be some sort of big picture thinking about what the future of the legal sector is. But secondly, and I'll be asking panelists, we want to also provide practical tips and advice for you. We don't want it all to be sort of, here's the future, here's the robots. We want what are ways that you can, maybe change things, or ideas that you can change your business, even maybe in small ways. And then thirdly, I want to get interaction. So there will be the opportunity to ask questions. Please, it will be far more interesting if we get them from the floor. You can also interact if you want to through our hashtag SRA Innovate, and we'll be tweeting about it. We also have viewers online as well, so welcome to them. Now, I promised to give you the answer to my sort of spy man in the pub and what he was doing and how he knew who I was. Does anyone have any ideas? How did he know my full name? It was my brother. Well, this would be an incredible, Chris, if it's like a Scylla moment where I got, he's actually my dad or my brother. No, he wasn't a relative of mine. Anyone else want to have a guess? Yep. Did I think I was Benedict Cumberbatch? 5'7", Benedict Cumberbatch, but I'd be very happy to be mistaken for him. Anyone else? I'll reveal all. It's quite a boring answer. Actually, well, I think this is the answer because I never got to ask this guy. When he went to the bar to buy me a drink, he was on his phone, and I'd told him where I'd worked, just in the conversation. So I think he Googled me. So it's the most boring answer ever. He Googled me, and my name on that website, on the website of where I worked, was Benedict. So that's how he would have clocked it. So on that rather anticlimactic end, I'm going to invite the panel up so we can get things going again. If you want to come up to the stage, and we'll start the first panel session. Right, thank you. So I'm just going to introduce the panellists, and I'll start with you, Daryl, as you're sitting next to me. So we've got Daryl Cook from Gunnar Cook, and Daryl, I think, started life as a barrister, then worked in a sort of variety of city firms, and then went on to set up Gunnar Cook, which is a really interesting law firm, growing rapidly, and we'll hear a bit more about their story. But Daryl is a bit of a polymath as well, because he ran a property business, he owned a pub, which he said he learnt more than anything else from, so perhaps we'll hear about that. And he's also found time to write a book, I think, to innovate or not to innovate. So, and you should have been sent all these bios beforehand, so if you like what Daryl says, you can click on the link there and buy his book. You've got a book to plug as well, Rachel. This is Rachel Roche from Roche Legal, which she founded. And Rachel has just finished a book last year on how to start up a law firm, which I think had a manically written chapter, didn't it, on disaster recovery, because it has been published last year. But Rachel has been recognised as Sole Practitioner of the Year as the Law Society. Really interesting firm based in York, and I think she'll provide some interesting insights as well around what small firms can do in terms of perhaps tech and innovation. And then next along we have Sally Holdway from Teal Legal. I think Sally started life as a solicitor in some large firms, but then switched to set up Teal Legal, which I think you've described as a technology company. And so we'll find out a bit about that, but doing work in the legal space. And they're doing some really interesting work around sort of tech and conveyancing. And also, you've also written books as well on process design and technology. So there you go. And then finally, we have Kat, who joins us online, as you can see. Kat Wolfton, and she's a partner and innovation manager at Waitmans, based here in Liverpool. And she's very much, I think, an expert on innovation and future skills. She's won a string of awards in that space. And yeah, it would be really interesting to hear how Waitmans, a bigger firm based here in Liverpool, approach tech. So the way this is going to work is I've got some questions I want to ask the panel, but I'm going to come to you guys pretty quickly. So think through your questions, and we'll come to you. But I've got an opening question for the panel, and perhaps we'll start with you, Daryl, and we'll move along. I suppose it's what does innovation in the legal sector mean to you?
I think innovation. I think it's a badly used word to some extent, because I think that there's a management maxim, isn't there, that says that if it isn't broke, don't fix it. And I think it must be the worst management maxim ever, because we should constantly be innovating. You know, that is the world. We should constantly innovating. And I think sometimes when we use the word innovation, we seem to, it creates a mystery around it, as though there's something special around it. And innovation is just about improvement, and that's what we should be doing. I think as an industry, we do really need to look at ourselves, because I think, you know, when I look at businesses that I work for, they're far ahead of us in terms of innovation. And I personally think the only industry that's behind us is probably the public sector, and that's quite worrying. So I do think there's a real challenge for us as an industry, but I kind of don't like the term innovation in some ways, because it's just about constant improvement, which we should always be doing.
Well, as someone who works in the public sector, there's a challenge for me. No, thank you, Daryl. What about you, Rachel? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think for me, it doesn't mean izzy-wizzy technology or spending heaps of money. It's, for me, incremental changes and marginal gains. And going back to basics a lot of the time as well, things like mapping processes and just looking at what you're trying to do and making communication easier as well, both internally and with the clients.
Sally?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, isn't it, I think. We take an approach...
Then find the technology to suit it. And I think because of the way, so this does answer your question, I think, the way we've grown up as law firms, we are a little bit frightened of that. Whereas I think chief executives in other businesses are not as frightened as that. They surround themselves with people better than themselves, but actually they know that all they have to do is make the decisions. So people come in and they set the business case for what they're trying to achieve, and they choose the technology along those lines. Whereas I think there is a fear in the law that technology will take, and actually I think the other thing is, just going back onto the point that you made, I think that I always see that delivering legal services, my job is to give people peace of mind. That's exactly what my job is, not to give a will or an employment contract. People come because they've got a problem, and my job is to give peace of mind. So I'm not going to hand that over to a robot to do that. It's a very personal service, but I'll use the robot to help me to give that better service. And it's interesting as well, you look at companies like Amazon, fantastic technology, unbelievable. But I remember about 6 weeks ago, I had an issue just before I went to bed, about 11:30 at night. I thought I'd contact Amazon to tell them about this problem. Within 2 minutes, someone rang me back from Amazon to see what the problem was. It was a really personal service. So unbelievable technology, but ultimately it was a really personal service. And we have to be the ones who control the technology that we use. So in our firm, we were pushed down a route for quite a while of taking all-encompassing new IT systems into the business, and I struggled to really get my head around it until we decided to go best in breed. And by going best in breed, we decide everything that we want that suits our business, because everything talks to each other these days. There's so much out there, but you have to decide what's right for your business.
Sally, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think we do have a challenge in the legal sector, right, which is around the regulatory requirements. And I know your book is a lot shorter now than it was before, you know, which is super helpful. But other sectors aren't necessarily tempered by that, so they have been able to run at technology a lot faster. I think so far as we're concerned, that's great for us, isn't it? Because they've done all the learning and made all the mistakes, so we can take a look actually what are the good bits, what are the things that clients actually want to use and engage. And I suppose I'm talking about consumer legal services there, kind of the traditional high street type work types. Open banking, I think, is a prime example. We spend quite a lot of time keeping our eye on what's going on in that sector to see whether we can apply the learnings there into the legal world. You know, so there's a lot of work that's going on so far as categorisation of spending for mortgage approvals. So we're doing similar things so far as conveyancing. You know, we have a tool which takes title deed information and runs assessments against it to see whether it will comply with due diligence requirements for lenders, which we can then feed into practitioners on a triage basis, which we think will hopefully help them from a risk and compliance point of view. So yeah, we do think other sectors are further ahead, but we think that's actually good news for us.
And Kat, what do you think? Do you think we can learn from other sectors? And also on this sort of discussion, Darryl picked up that some things tech isn't appropriate for because it's that face-to-face reassurance that you need. Just adding to that, I suppose from your perspective, what's really ripe for tech and what's going to be a dead end if you try and get tech as a solution?
Yeah, so I think we shouldn't forget that lawyers kind of without the tech are good at innovating. You know, a lawyer's day job, isn't it? It's to push the boundaries of case law and legislation, you know, to the benefit of their clients. And that is in a sense innovation. I think what happens is, you know, as a profession, we get scared by kind of the talk of technology and kind of run a mile. I think kind of lawyers have been at a slow warm up to tech, but it does very much depend on kind of the tech you're looking at. Some of the stuff that we looked at maybe 3 or 4 years ago has become kind of much more mainstream as time has gone on. In terms of, I suppose, the kind of the things that work well, obviously it depends on the type of law firm and the work, but you're really, I suppose, looking for opportunities, regardless of whether you use tech or not, to surprise and delight your clients. And innovation really should just be kind of one of the pieces in your toolkit to help do things like that. So, I mean, we use tools like Kira, so it's a machine reading piece of technology. Essentially, it reads documents like a lawyer would, but we always have the lawyer read the documents as well. So the benefits of using tools like that are kind of the speed of review. I suppose from a risk perspective for clients, being able to sample a much bigger pool of documents than you would do if you traditionally kind of, you know, lawyers in a room and there's a pile of documents. I suppose in terms of kind of cul-de-sacs and stuff, then there's an awful lot of digital lipstick and kind of marketing and hype. You know, you open the Gazette or whatever it is, every day there's something else that's described as kind of innovative. You know, and to earlier points, really, you know, there's no point just buying this shiny tech if it's going to sit on a shelf. You've got to have somebody who owns it, who wants to use it. It's got to integrate with existing systems. Otherwise, all you've done is just make more, you know, kind of hassle for the people who are going to be using the tech. And again, you know, as we've heard, get your processes sorted right first. So, you know, throwing technology at stuff just results in faster chaos if the process isn't correct in the first place.
Thank you, Kat. I'm going to come to the audience in a second for a question. I've just got one follow-up on that for you, Rachel. I know you've used tech within your firm to sort of streamline your client intake process. Do you want to share what you've done there?
Yes, this is still a work in progress, but my attention in the last 6 months has been turned to onboarding clients and just, like you say, streamlining it and to make it easy for the client, but also easy for us to do the compliance stuff that we have to do internally. And of course, that affects the whole firm across any kind of matter. So we use things like Zapier, which is a program which connects our website to our case management system. So it feeds the information through so that we don't have to input it twice. So those sorts of small things can actually cumulatively have quite a big time-saving advantage. So yeah, things like that we do to just try and cut down, 30 seconds a day, 5 minutes a day, 15 minutes a day. And that's what I'm continually working on at the moment.
Great. Right, I'm going to look out. Could you raise your hand if anyone in the audience has a question? I have lots of questions, but I'm already bored of my own slightly nasally voice. So if does anyone here have a question, and the microphone will come to you? Okay, we're shy at the moment, so I'm going to come back and prod you again in a few minutes. But I suppose let's move on to the setup of law firms, because Darryl, at Gunnar Cook, in terms of the model you have, that was a bit of a different model, wasn't it, when you set up? Do you want to talk through that?
So our model is a revenue share model, but I kind of describe it. It is interesting. We get called all sorts of things, virtual law firm, challenger law firm, consultancy firm. I just think we remunerate differently. We've got everything that big law offers, but actually we don't have the bureaucracy, we don't have the remuneration committees. People design their own lives, they decide when they want to work, when they want to retire. It's just a kind. So that's the difference. But I don't see in other ways we're any different.
And does anyone on the panel think that does the partner model potentially stifle innovation? Does anyone have a view on that?
I do.
Well, should we we'll come to Darryl, but is anyone else on the panel want to go first on that one?
Yeah, I mean, it's not the partnership model per se, is it? But I think that there are practical implications there, and certainly over many years, I've spoken to law firms about adopting technology, and generally speaking, this is just my experience, what would happen is that there would be one partner in particular who was super keen on technology. You would attend a meeting and not all the partners would be super keen on technology, and it would then be a conversation that dragged into months or potentially years as to whether that should be adopted. So certainly we've found the firms where the responsibility for that decision is not a general partnership decision, but a bit like you've got a cold pour of coffee, you have someone who is in charge of whether you want to call it technology or innovation with a budget, and they just go off and do it and report back, obviously, to the partnership, works more effectively. I think there's another thing to add into that as well. We find it works even better if that is not just a management decision, but when looking at new technologies, actually it's the people at the coalface who are going to be using that tech, whether it's case management or anything else, who are involved in that decision process. Because, again, certainly we've seen instances where law firms will spend a lot of money on a new system, but actually it isn't necessarily going to be fit for purpose for the people who are using it day in, day out. So if you can get those two things together, we find that can really help firms with regards to bringing new systems on and making them work for the firm quickly.
Those painful partnership meetings is the reason why I'm a sole practitioner.
Yeah, that's the solution. Become a sole practitioner.
I don't think that's going to be my solution forever, but it's been my solution so far.
Yeah. What about you, Kat? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it kind of depends on your partner, and I'm at Wakeman. I think it's really important to do is kind of partners as a cohort. It's to try and get them to understand that they don't need to be the one kind of using all this tech and stuff. What they need to do is encourage and foster that innovation culture within a firm, but they don't necessarily have to be the ones doing all the pilots and stuff. Free that up to the people in their team who, deal with those kind of challenges day in, day out, and are much more kind of attuned to the realities of some of this, rather than kind of, looking on high and then forcing tech on people. But again, I think partner involvement really, it can be good and bad really. I think their role is to champion and to free up the right people in their in their teams to work with innovation teams or, you know, IT teams to be able to progress projects.
Thank you. Daryl?
How long have you got on to answer this question, really?
Is everyone okay to extend this event for 2 hours?
I completely agree. I think the big law firms have got a massive problem because you own 0.02% or something of the equity and you think you are the most important owner in the business. So the politics and the bureaucracy in those big law firms is a nightmare, and trying to get consensus and do things with 100-page reports and buying people off and all the politics that goes on is, I just don't think, sustainable going forward. It should be easier in a smaller law firm, but I think what I do think it does do is it does come back to leadership. And I think leadership is so important, whether you're running a village hall committee, whether you're running a small team, whether you're in the biggest company in the world, it all comes down to that leadership. And I think that is really where the challenge that we all have to do, because either you are that person who's got all that experience and therefore can give that vision and give that strategy and drive for the firm, or you have to bring it in somehow. And I think some of our law firms need to understand perhaps we bring that in from outside, from people who've got it, but then we have to give them the authority to get on with it and do it. Or actually, if we're not doing that, we recognise that our role is just to make decisions. So we just surround ourselves with better people from other industries who come in and give us ideas, and all we do is encourage that innovation, encourage the ideas, and we're the one who makes the decisions. But any way you look at it, I think it is down to leadership and how we structure our firms, whether it's small or a large firm.
Okay, and what about the impacts of the pandemic? All the firms we have here are already doing working, I imagine, in fairly flexible ways, but what do you think the impact of the pandemic has been? Has it really accelerated innovation, or has it just forced people to do some small things differently? Anyone want to share their view on that? Sally?
Inevitably. I mean, we, as law firms, we were all tipped into a world of being a virtual law firm overnight, weren't we, 18 months ago? So, innovation and technology came to the fore then for us to be able to deal with some really practical problems, like how do I get a document signed, or how do I progress transactions? So inevitably, law firms have been taking a much closer look at technology and how that can help with managing cases. I think what we're seeing now is quite interesting. I think what we've described it as during the pandemic, it was almost like there was a kind of a ground level tactical use of technology to solve the particular problem or the bottleneck which lockdown presented. Whereas now what we're finding is we're talking to firms who've said, well, actually, we didn't really look at that bit of technology before. It was actually quite useful. Let's take a step back and have a more strategic view on should we be looking at other types of technology and how we can kind of investigate our process flows and workflows to see whether we can be looking at other areas as well. So, I mean, inevitably, certainly, our answer to that question is yes.
What about you, Rachel? I know that I was chatting to you beforehand and you said you missed the sort of buzz of being in an office as a small team, and it's hard to recreate that online. How did you find it?
I'm enjoying being back in the office with other members of the team. I do like that. I also like working from home and working remotely. I think the pandemic has really sped up the change. But for me, I think the most positive thing is that it's also changed the mindset of a lot of other lawyers to consider the possibilities of making their legal services available online. So I think I'll be having a very different conversation with people at the end of this than I was at the end of this panel 2 years ago, because I think people's mindsets shifted forward.
And do you think clients' perception has changed to what they expect, or actually law firms have just caught up with what clients were sort of expecting? So a video conferencing call, for instance, I know some firms said, well, I need to meet my client face to face. But actually, do you think it was a mindset shift, or actually everyone's shifted together? I
think clients' mindset has shifted as well. So we now do 100% of our onboarding online, whereas before, I mean, I can't really remember, to be honest, so much has happened, what the percentage was. But everybody onboards online. There's no, I mean, we have an alternative, but I don't think I've used it in 18 months. So that's been great. So what we've built is working, and clients are expecting that. They don't think, oh, it's a bit unusual, because everything else is available online. So I think it's a positive thing from that point of view.
Daryl?
I think it's a real opportunity. I think it's a massive opportunity because technology has been forced on us, which we can now use. So actually before the pandemic, we did use Teams completely within the firm, but we could never use it with clients because clients didn't use it. So it is a massive opportunity. So we have actually, but I think it's more than that. So we have 55 or 60 people in what we call GC Trust, which is the back office support that runs the firm. And we've just launched a 10-point plan and coming back to the office, which includes all sorts of things. So we've kind of, because I do think service levels have deteriorated during the pandemic in lots of different businesses. And so
What do you think is behind that? Is it the challenge of staff working from home, mental fatigue, or?
I always use the phrase, there's no such things as bad officers, or as bad soldiers, only bad officers. And I think it's that we've not learned how to manage people working from home. So I think generally I would say service levels have dropped a bit. So we had spent a lot of time working about how do we get those service levels back to where they are. So we have introduced a plan where people can work at home 2 days a week, but then there's other things that we introduced. So we're opening some bookshops at the moment for a loneliness project that we're doing, and we're allowing everyone to spend 2 days a year in working in those bookshops. We've even introduced a lottery internally. We've introduced more training programs. So we've looked at everything and thought, well, how do we now come back but really improve the service levels? Using technology so people can work 2 days a week at home, but actually there's other things that we can do because, I think everyone probably agrees that the training isn't as good if you're sat at home. If you're sat in an office and listening to someone on the phone, your training is going to be better, you're going to learn more. So we can't lose that. The buzz and the culture deteriorates if you all sit at home. You've got to get that culture and buzz back into your organization. So we've got to be careful again that we don't just think it's technology. There's so many other things to it. So, as I said, we launched this 10-point plan, which has got so many things in it to try and get people excited about coming back to the office.
I love the tip of everyone, you should get your staff working in a bookshop 2 days a year. Kat, what's your view on the sort of impact of the pandemic, either at your firm or more broadly for the legal sector?
Yeah, so I think in terms of kind of the innovation angle, we've certainly had people come to us that have never come to us before, who've been more willing to have those kind of chats about ideas and stuff. I think mainly because they've seen, how everything has shifted online, and they've had to use technology as part of their kind of, their normal life as it was to be able to kind of connect with people. So certainly a lot more chats around that. I think in terms of kind of the role of an office kind of post-COVID and stuff, I mean, we were an agile firm before COVID, so kind of 3 days a week at home. There are some things that are just better in person. So, no matter how many versions of kind of virtual post-it notes you can have, there's always somebody who can't move them or write on them or whatever. Some things like that are just easier, kind of physically being together in a room. But I think we'll kind of change how we use offices. Certainly within my team, we're planning to kind of do our almost deep thinking work at home, and we'll go in on days when, as a team, we've got kind of a less hectic schedule, and the time will be to kind of speak to colleagues, to hear about problems, to chat through ideas, that kind of thing. So a bit of a shift in terms of kind of what we actually sit and do physically in an office.
Thanks, Kat. Right, I'm going to go back out to the audience again. You've had a bit more time to chew over questions. Have we got any questions from the audience? Would it be an incentive if I said I'll take you to the grapes and try and guess your name afterwards? Or is that a disincentive to ask a question? We've still got no questions from the... Yes, here we go. Right, I saw the man in the pink jumper at the back, and then we'll come to you second.
Thank you. I was just really interested to hear the panel's thoughts on, Darryl, you touched on it, but about innovation and improvement around people. So not technology, but people management, how law firms treat people, how they manage the teams better, and innovation in that part of a business.
Really great
how
question.
Important it is.
Really good question. Darryl and others chip in.
Yeah, I mean, it starts from recruitment, and when we've learned a lot over 10 years, we're really particular on our recruitment now. We have what's called a journey, which is to come into the organisation, specific things that we need in our organisation, but we also recruit very much on mindsets. So we do what we call AVAs, testing people when they come in. And whether that's in a law firm or whether it's in GC Trust, I always think the worst thing in organisations is people who are negative, who don't have open mindsets, because they just pull you back. So our biggest focus is recruitment, and we've got a lot better. We've made loads of mistakes, so we've got a lot better at learning how to do that, and that's been a constant improvement. And then we've got really better at onboarding them. You know, when people come, before they come in with us, they do what's called, we don't do business plans, they do what's called a VTO, which is like an action plan. We do a 5-week check-in when they come in.
What does VTO stand for, sorry?
A Vision Traction Organiser, which is just like a 2-page plan.
Of course, everyone knew that, but
it's a 2-page plan, which is what's the vision. Because they're I say when you join us, you're not a lawyer anymore, you're a lawyer and a business person. So we teach business skills. That's exactly what we teach. So we have to learn what they're trying to do, what their vision is, and then we help them to do that. We put them through a check-in for 5 weeks, and then they join what's called a studio, which is a training program in order to make them entrepreneurial lawyers. So the whole focus is on people. I mean, I think people is everything. You know, it's the most important thing. And if you put all your innovation into your people, then all the other things will follow, I think.
Anyone else want to share thoughts on that?
I mean, it's not from a law firm perspective. We're a technology business, but there's a few things that we've been doing kind of pre-COVID, but we've been doing them more during COVID. You know, so one of the things, one of our mantras is work is what you do, not where you go. So we've never been prescriptive as to whether someone comes into the office or works from home. In fact, we've had, so cliche, but one of our developers working from the back of his VW camper van this summer, sitting doing coding, you know, so how cool is that? Yeah. But it's around choice. We've been talking about client choice, haven't we? And our approach is it's the same from an employee perspective. Another thing that we do, which I have to say is just in the R&D side of the business, is we have a 4-day week as standard. And from a productivity point of view, we found that's made a big impact. We get more done than we would do if we were working 5-day weeks.
So it doesn't even remain the same productivity? You think it actually goes up with a 4-day week?
Yes.
Oh, right.
Is our experience in our technology world.
Well, so. I hope my boss is watching. But yeah, that's a really interesting point. Rachel, what do you think on that?
It's a really interesting question. I'm still learning about that sort of stuff as a sole practitioner. My team's only small. But that said, I've recently got someone to help me a bit more hands-on with the HR, and I echo what Daryl says about it all, starting with the recruitment. Going forward and coming out of the pandemic, I'm really keen to build a bigger team. I think that gives me more flexibility, which I can then pass on to my team members. So, for example, at the moment, it's vital that I have some office presence all the time. We don't know when people are popping in, there are deliveries, there's post, all that practical stuff that, I was picking up during the pandemic. I need some sort of solid office presence there, but I would love to be able to say to people, yes, work at home, do what you want, because I really do genuinely believe in all of that type of flexibility. It works really well for me, and so I assume it will work for lots of other people too. But I think you have to balance that against the needs of the business, and you have to you have to get your business to a certain level to be able to give those benefits, to pass those benefits on, which is the whole point. The reason I wanted to set up my firm was to provide a really lovely working environment, to give people the flexibility, and to have people feel like they were a bit more in control of their own destiny, and to be involved in the decision making. And so that's what I'm still working on.
How important is a cute dog in the office?
Oh yeah, and a little dog.
Rachel has a cute dog in her office, rather than that being the most random question in the world. Kat, did you have any thoughts on the question?
Yeah, I think we've got to be careful, haven't we? I don't think COVID has made people bad managers. We've had bad managers before that, so we've got to kind of be careful to make that distinction. I think it definitely isn't. It's around a one-size-doesn't-fit-all approach, and I think we've probably got to work harder now in a hybrid environment to make sure we give people the opportunities. Traditionally, I suppose, back in an office, you'd have just almost dragged the trainee along with you as you kind of caught their eye to meetings and stuff. So a bit more planning to make sure that you are involving people and giving them the kind of the same, learning and skills kind of, outcomes and stuff that they would have got had you physically been in an office with them.
Thank you. And we had a question at the front here for the woman in the striped dress. If we just get the microphone to you.
There's a feeling sometimes within the legal community that legal tech is very London-centric. For example, the Legal Geek Conference every year is always in London. It's never in any other part of the country. What can the SRA and what can the legal community in Liverpool do to put Liverpool or the Northwest on the map as a legal tech hub?
Well, obviously, one thing the SRA can do is have an Innovate event in Liverpool, which sounds like a great idea. But no, it's a really, it's a good question. Inevitably, in a lot of walks of life, things can be very London-centric. I suppose, one, does that matter more in the world we're in at the moment, where there is more acceptance of virtual engagement? And also, does anyone have any thoughts on, if there's lots of great stuff happening in Liverpool in legal tech, how do you get that out there, and how does, whether it's government or regulators, etc., make sure that's fulfilling its potential? Sally, do you want to go
I would agree 100% with that as a problem, right? So as we started out on our R&D journey, I spent more time in London than I've ever done in my entire career, which seemed kind of counterintuitive, really, if we were developing tech.
And you're based sort of Stafford,
Stoke-on-Trent? Yeah, we're based Stoke-on-Trent, so an hour or so down the road from here. We've always done quite a lot of work with local universities. So Keele University is the one local to us, and we've done several KTP partnerships with them. That's not limited to tech companies. They're generally speaking open to law firms as well, and certainly I'd advise everyone to pick the phone up and see what's available. We got incredible support, and working in collaboration with academic organisations means actually that you can access things like Innovate UK opportunities more easily, having that academic approach as well. But 100%, I think particularly when we're talking about consumer legal services, it's going on the high streets across the country, isn't it? But yeah, well done, Ben and SRA, for coming to Liverpool. So we'll expect this to be a regular occurrence. But I think the networking side, and of course with COVID we can all do that over Zoom. But I think getting together and actually having networking events where practitioners and providers can get together and can compare notes, and the unbundling project that you've described, I think is great, isn't it? And the fact that that's happening out on a regional basis.
And there's definitely, in terms of the firms involved, both in past pilots and that, there's no sort of regional bias there. So
I think why don't you set up the Liverpool Legal Tech Hub? Get some people together and have a lunch once a month. There must be appetite here.
And for instance, I know in the Northwest, obviously, there's a lot of personal injury firms, and it's quite a hub there. And actually, personal injury is an interesting sector, one, because actually personal injury has been quite good in terms of an access to justice point of view, at actually getting people through the door who might not be. And I think it's interesting if you get hubs, and hubs create momentum in terms of then things progressing.
And I think it really helps to just collaborate, doesn't it, and share ideas. I think, Sally, you were saying earlier about it being a great leveller with tech. I think you need to take the competition out of it and to progress the career as a whole, to be able to be open to sharing ideas between firms.
I think as well, I think there is a mindset issue again, I think, to some extent. And we have a legal technology office which is based in Budapest, in Hungary, and we have excellent and over lawyers and developers based there. But it was led by our Berlin office because it is so much more advanced than us. But most of our firm is run by people who live in Bolton. And it's a very, it's kind of a northwest-driven firm. But I constantly say to them, you've got to throw off your mindset, and London thinks that much bigger, and New York thinks bigger again, and Silicon Valley thinks bigger again. And some of us were our own worst enemies because we're kind of much more cautious than we need to be, and we need to think bigger. And that's all that London has. It has a bigger mindset, and New York has a bigger mindset again. And, I think coming from Manchester, and I guess the same in Liverpool, we need to throw off that mindset and just think, as Ben said at the beginning, some of the greatest innovations have come out of the Northwest, Manchester and Liverpool. So we just need to have our own confidence and really believe in it. And as you say, start small, build hubs, grow it. But, just think the world is unlimited. We don't have to. We can think bigger than London if we actually want to do that. But just put one foot in front of the other and start.
Kat, what do you think?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, before COVID, my toddler used to ask if I actually lived in London. I was kind of down there that often, so grateful not to be doing that at the moment. I think, there are kind of Liverpool and Manchester networks. So there's the Manchester University Tech Initiative, which is we're part of a variety of different firms, kind of claimant, defendant, and all different areas of work. Again, Liverpool University, law departments and computer science departments really kind of open to speaking to people. And I think there is something, as a collective group, is to speak, amongst ourselves. We would, and we do, kind of more than happy to speak to other firms and stuff. I think there's less kind of fear of sharing stuff with innovation. It seems kind of less secretive, so people are generally more open to kind of chatting and being more honest and talking through kind of, pitfalls and lessons learned, that kind of thing. So, I suppose a plea really that if anybody does want to kind of have those chats, just to pick up the phone to those of us doing it in the region, who'd be more than happy to facilitate them as well.
That's great. Thank you. Have we got any other questions for? We've got someone down here and then one at the back and then one here. So if we perhaps come to this man here and then we'll go to the person who had their hand at the back and then we'll come to the gentleman at the front.
I'm interested to know whether you feel that the profession needs to learn how to fail better. I don't mean as an objective, but in terms of innovation and ideas, there's always a danger that people are fearful of putting their head above the parapet with a new idea because it will impact their career, and they feel that if they fail, they won't be listened to again. I think it was James Dyson said from every failure he learned how to succeed, and it took him 6,000 attempts to make his first vacuum cleaner. So I wonder whether that's just something as an industry or as a profession we need to learn how to accept that not everything is going to work, but we will learn from things that we do.
And do you think, just behind that question, do you think, is there something in the legal sector that, because there's an argument that the legal sector is by its nature risk averse because it's about managing risk, that lends itself perhaps to that mindset?
Well, lawyers always look for the downside in everything, and if someone comes up with a bright idea, they'll all rush to try and think of why it won't work, and I just feel like we need as an industry just to open our minds. And I speak from experience, having come up with more crap ideas than most people.
Okay. I'm sure that's not true. I can match you on that, I'm sure. Okay, should we go to Kat, you first? Because obviously you've got a whole innovation team there. So.
Yeah, really, I suppose, kind of important aspect. 2 points to that, really. I think there's certainly something about mindset and making sure that kind of junior lawyers and people entering the profession are comfortable with failure. Quite often they come from an educational system where they've kind of passed every exam they've ever been given and stuff. They, a lot of coursework, they know the topics and stuff, so they're kind of set up to win. And then suddenly coming into a firm and doing innovation projects and being told, what, this might work, it might not, and you've got to be okay with that. So certainly something in that kind of resilience and being able to cope with failure. And then I suppose from a firm perspective, just being honest about it. So we've got a pot of money to play with for innovation, but we're really clear at board level that, some of that will work, some of it won't. We've probably got 40 to 50 projects on the go or kind of ideas at any time. And again, really open and honest that, maybe 10% of them will actually reach kind of production. And, they'll fail for a variety of reasons. It could be good idea, wrong time. It could be a resource issue. It could be kind of a too disruptive an idea for now. But I think we've got to be really kind of more comfortable discussing them, learning the lessons from them, and then kind of moving on, dusting ourselves down and picking ourselves back up, and to share really, I suppose, the failure as much as the success. Otherwise, people never try anything. Always a little bit wary of these kind of innovation departments where everything is a success. I mean, if everything is a success, are you really kind of pushing the boundaries of innovation enough?
Thank you, Kat. Who else on the panel? Does the law sector need to come better at failing?
It's an interesting one, isn't it? And certainly in the tech world, it's a fail fast is a badge of honour, right? You have to have had loads of failed ideas, otherwise you're not doing it right. But then, obviously, kind of wearing the my solicitor hat, this is just an innate fear of failure, isn't there? If we really fail, then you guys are going to come along and intervene in our firm and shut us down, so we better get it right. So I think it's around how we couch and define...
That possibly isn't true, just to clarify. Yeah. But it depends what the failure is, I suppose.
Well, indeed, exactly. And let's be talking extreme cases there, but it's how we define it, isn't it? And also how we manage the risk. And I think, again, certainly we see... it's interesting, there's a lot of tech companies that will come to the marketplace because they've gone through an experience as a consumer, thought, well, technology can help this. We find the best technology solutions are ones which have lawyers involved in building those, because you have to have an understanding of actually what that risk environment looks like. And if it's done correctly, then the risk of failure, however we want to describe that, goes down. But actually we can move the dial on that risk management, and the innovations can improve that. So have a step change for lawyers so that, kind of that safety net of the rules and regulations can be enhanced by technology. So yeah, I think it's almost never the twain shall meet, isn't it? And should we get better at learning how to fail? It's a super interesting question, I think.
We've got about 10 minutes left, so Darryl, if we come to you and then I want to get in the other two questions,
Okay.
so we come to you.
I think it's a terrific question, actually. I really do, because it goes right to the core of the culture of all our organisations. We have a phrase in our organisation, which it's interesting, I started using it and now people use it all the time. There's no such thing as failure. The only failure is not trying. But then you've got to get it embedded in the organisation. And I think that's quite hard to do, because you're right, people have that instinct of being frightened of failure. I was reading Netflix, book, what's he called? Reed Hastings, is it? I can't remember his name, actually, the guy who runs Netflix. They promote it, they really promote failure, and they do case studies of people have failed, so you learn from it, and it never stops their progress and development. But it's a real cultural thing. So again, I think it comes back to the leader who sets that. Often will show the things that we failed will often come from me, and I'll show those and show that vulnerability as much as I possibly can, because other people benefit from that and take from it, and it changes that culture, I think.
I think it was a woman at the back, if we come to her question. Yeah, just speak. Yep.
Okay. I just wanted to ask to what extent you'd commissioned any external market research or used client interaction in terms of perhaps focus groups or feedback or their input. If we were another industry, then it would be a research and development department that was responsible for innovation, and research would be as much part of the process as the actual development itself. So just interested what each of you have done in that regard.
That's going to be a beautiful segue to the next panel, but it's a great question for this one as well. So, yeah, how important is consumer research, and is that actually where you should be starting before you're even going on this innovation route? Sally, you were nodding your head.
Yeah, yes, I think is the short answer to that,
Yeah.
right? And I think as practitioners, it's easy to make assumptions about what clients want, isn't it? We do it day in, day out, but we do it from certainly one side of the desk. And it's super easy to do that, you guys will all send out questionnaires at the end of a transaction, I'm sure. Just add one about if we did this bit, if you could access this on your smartphone, whatever it might be, would that have been something you would have been interested in? And ask the clients. You've all got a cohort of clients who will be more than happy to share their insights. But certainly, absolutely, it's something that we look at, and we also look at pre-design stage, but as we start to roll them out, to be making sure we're getting constant consumer feedback, because I think it's not just around innovation to be replacing current ways of doing it, kind of traditional ways of doing things, but what's going to flow from that is different types of products and services, which is again very easy to make assumptions on something that clients are interested in. One of our initial assumptions around conveyancing is that people want it to be faster. Actually, the consumer research did, it's not around it being fast, it's around trusting that the process will complete. So if you can provide that certainty earlier on, they still actually don't really mind if it takes a while, and that might suit them better, to move in at the beginning of a school term date or something like that, which may be a few months down the line. So yeah, 100% we would say that's important.
Rachel?
Yeah, we've done a certain amount of research. We've done things like A/B testing online and questionnaires to our website users. And it has really helped shape things like the user experience as people come into the website and how they communicate with us. It would be great to be able to do a lot more, but obviously you've got to look at the resources available to you. I think one of the assumptions I had as well, which probably on reflection was not right at all, that about the onboarding online, I think we should have perhaps encouraged that a bit more, given the 100% intake that we do now via the online onboarding. And I think that would have saved us a great deal of time. I should have perhaps asked those questions before then spending more time trying to onboard people offline, which probably wasn't as convenient for them as I might have thought.
Darryl, did you have any?
Yeah, just quickly, I think it's essential, absolutely essential. I mean, someone like Jeff Bezos would never launch anything without doing proper focus groups and proper customer testing, and we do the same. So, as I said, we're best of breed technology in the firm. We'll have different groups who are testing technology all the time, and if that's successful, then that's when we'll invest in it. The same thing with our products. We have a great startup product at the moment, which is being tested by, I think it's about 20 companies at Manchester University, 20 at University of Cambridge, and 20 charities. So, constantly believe in that testing. I think it's really essential.
Now, I've been given the 5-minute warning, so, and I know there was one other question, I think you had a question at the front, did you? No? Sorry, did anyone have it? Yeah, right next to it. I was almost pointing in the right direction. So yeah, this man here, and this might be our last question from the floor.
Hello, quick question directly to Rachel, if I may. And I direct the question to you because you're a sole practitioner, as I am also. Over the years, I've been very enthusiastic about the kind of services which you already provide, such as unbundling, selling of products online and that kind of thing. But what I found difficult is actually accessing the right IT experts who can facilitate those plans, as it were. So do you have any advice that you can provide in that regard?
Do you have any advice? I think this is the hardest thing that I've found over the last 8 years, is finding the experts and finding the people to be able to share the vision and to do the implementation, because we're lawyers, we don't necessarily have the tech skills. I have heaps of ideas. I know what I want to do. I know I want things to look a certain way. I want things to be able to work in a certain way. So you've not only got to find the person that you can work well with and that can share your vision, but you also have to really try and get them to understand the process behind it all. And also somebody that will do what they say they're going to do and not going to cost, they won't cost the earth. So I think it's a real challenge, and I don't have an answer, I'm afraid. It's something I'm still really working on.
It's a shared problem.
I think it's a universal problem. Everyone I speak to has the same issue. I have seriously considered coming out of the law and learning to code and doing it myself, because I'm really passionate about it, and I think there is a huge opportunity for lawyers who have that passion to create a real business for that. I don't have an answer, but it's something that I'm constantly thinking about.
It was a question for Rachel, but anyone else want to comment on that on the panel?
I think it's some of the stuff you said at the top of the session, to be honest, Ben, around networking. There are opportunities out there. You're running pilots which firms can get involved with. Land Registry are doing stuff around electronic signatures. So just kind of keeping that watching brief and getting involved with those pilots, I think, can then, from a networking point of view, put you in touch with other organisations who might be able to help you with your particular projects. Is one thing, but we've touched on it already, haven't we? I think this session that the networking is starting to expand out into the regions, but it's not fixed yet.
And next time we run this event, we'll have a sort of IT expert corner where everyone can go and nab an IT expert. I'm being given the time signal, so what I'm going to do is, if perhaps each panellist, I could just ask them, if there was one message you think you'd like the audience to take away around innovation, or one tip or advice, what would that be? And we'll go along. Darryl, I'll put you in it first, and then we'll go along.
I think it's that phrase that I used earlier to an earlier question, that there's no such thing as failure. The only failure is not trying. So the worst thing you can do is not do anything. And as you start to do things, you will learn. And you'll make loads of mistakes, but that's fine, because you're learning from those mistakes.
Thanks, Darryl. Rachel?
The word that's sprung to mind is persevere. And just keep trying new things. I think it's just variations on the theme, really.
Sally?
I think I'd say, and I know how difficult it is, as I've been that busy fee earner, but trying to carve time out specifically for thinking about innovation and technology. It can be a time-consuming process, but if you do get it right, then absolutely it can. It's the old adage, isn't it? There's a lot of software out there that can save time, but lawyers are quite often too busy to look at the time-saving technology that might be out there. So if you can carve time out of a busy fee-earning diary to do it, do so.
Great. And Kat, what about you?
Yep, I suppose kind of collaborate, really speak to people who are kind of doing innovation in other firms and kind of share knowledge and stuff. And, we don't all need to be reinventing the wheel in isolation. So really kind of network and all share similar problems and look maybe for wider solutions than just firm ones.
No, that's great. Well, thank you ever so much to our panel. I think they've done a brilliant job. If you could give them a round of applause, I think some really interesting insights there. I I think those were warm applause, but we made sure there was no soft furnishings and an echo in this room to really make that sound as loud as possible. No, I think the panellists done a great job. Thank you for the time. Some really interesting insights there. We've got a bit of a break now just to have some coffee, try and have a chat with people, do the networking, which Sally recommended. And then we're going to be back in here at 12:15. And then we've got a session focused on the consumer angle and innovating for consumers. So I'll see you back in here. Thank you.